Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear students, how are you? Hope you all are well by the grace of Almighty. I am fine. Today I am going to take a class on boys. It is very important for you. First of all, you have to know what is boys. The boys of above tells whether the subject of a sentence performs or receives the action. That means there are two types of boys, such as active and passive. In active boys, the subject performs directly, but in passive boys, the action is acted upon the subject. And there is another characteristic of active boys, that is, the subject is the agent of the sentence, but in passive sentence the subject is the recipient. And the third characteristic of active boys is the subject is focused on. That means in active boys we focus on the subject, but in passive boys we focus on the action. Look at the example. She writes a letter. Here the subject is she, and we focus on the subject and we emphasis on the subject. But whenever we change into a passive one, that sentence is a letter is written by her. Here a letter is used in place of subject. That means a letter and written is focused on. Here we focus on the action. Here we focus on the action, but in active sentence we focus on subject. So in active boys we focus on subject, but in passive boys we focus on action. The structure of active boys is normally subject plus verb plus object. But when we change into passive, at first object is placed at the beginning of the passive sentence, then verb is used with an auxiliary verb, and then subject is used with a preposition. We know in our daily activities we use a lot of active sentences, and we have already known about that. In passive sentence there are some characteristics, so you have to know when we use passive sentence. I think there are two ways when we use passive sentence, and the first way is when subject is not important we use passive sentence, such as he is known as a rebel poet. Here there is no subject. We know know is a verb. Know is a verb, and we imagine that this verb subject, the subject of this verb probably people or we, but people is not used here, so we can say there is no importance of subject. That's why whenever subject is not important we use passive sentence. And the second way is when we do not know who did the action we use passive sentence, such as my pen was stolen. Here steal is a verb, but who stole my pen I don't know, so I use here a passive sentence. Now we can turn to the next step. There are 4 steps to follow when we change an active sentence into passive sentence. The steps are: the first step is we have to identify subject, verb and object, such as this is an active sentence I ate rice. There I is a subject, ate is a verb, and rice is an object. So at first we have to identify subject, verb and object. Then we have to change the position object. Then we have to change the position of object. That means object is used at the beginning of a passive sentence. We know that object will become subject, such as when we change this sentence into passive, at first we have to write rice, and we have to know about the pronoun, because when the position of object is changed, we also change the form of pronoun. That means I will become me and me will become I. We will become us will become we. She will become her, he will become him, they will become them. So at first we have to change the position of object. That means object will become subject. Then in the third step we have to use B3, that means first participle of principal verb with auxiliary verb according to tense or person. So the third form of ate is eaten. As it is an example of first indefinite tense, we have to use here was. And in the fourth step we have to change the position of subject. That means subject will become object. So I becomes me. We know that subject is used at the end of the sentence of passive sentence. Subject is used at the end of a passive sentence with a preposition. We usually use by as preposition. Sometimes we have to use to, at, with, but most often we have to use by before object. So there are 4 steps to follow when we change an active sentence into passive. That means we have to identify subject, verb and object. Then we change the position of object. That means object will become subject. And then we have to use B3 with auxiliary verb. And in 4th step we have to change the position of subject. That means subject will become object with a preposition. Then we can turn to the next step. That means when we use auxiliary verb, we know there are a lot of auxiliary verbs such as am, is, are, was, were, have, has, can, could, may, might. But it is very important to know when we use right auxiliary verb. The first rule is when the active sentence is used in present indefinite mode, we have to use am, is, are as an auxiliary verb. Such as he sings a song. Here sing is the base form of sing. So it is an example of present indefinite tense. So we have to use is as an auxiliary verb because it is a singular subject. The second rule is when we find do not or does not in active sentence, we have to use am not, is not, are not in passive sentence, such as he does not sing a song. Whenever we change into a passive one, we have to use is not because there is does not in active sentence. And the third rule is, when we find out an active sentence in a first indefinite mode, we have to use was, were as auxiliary verb, such as he wrote a letter. It is an example of first indefinite tense because write is a base form, but wrote is a first form of write. So here we use was as an auxiliary verb. And the fourth rule is, when there is have, has, had in active sentence, we have to add been with have, has, had. That means have been, has been, had been have to be used in passive sentence, such as she has sung a song. Here there is has in active sentence, so we have to use has been in passive sentence. The next rule is, when there is modal in active sentence, we have to use or we have to add be with the modal, such as we can play cricket. Here can be is used because can is a modal auxiliary verb, so we add here be with the modal. So by following these rules, we can easily use auxiliary verb with the principal verb. That's all for today's class. Thank you.